The first stirring of technique, the seventh dawn, arrived with a bite of frost that crept along the mountain slopes and slipped into the courtyards of the sect. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, and the training platform glistened with a thin sheen of dew that caught the faint morning light. Disciples gathered in their blue robes, rubbing their hands together against the chill, but their eyes were bright with anticipation. It was not often instructor Cai introduced something new, and rumor had already spread the night before that today would bring more than punishment drills or breathing exercises. Liang stood among them, his posture steady despite the deep ache that still lingered in his muscles from the week of punishment. His body felt carved from bruises, yet beneath the exhaustion pulsed something new. It was faint and fragile, like a thread of silk in a storm, but it was undeniably his qi. His qi. He clung to it quietly, refusing to let Zhaoran or any other disciple see the hope that flickered in his chest. Instructor Cai appeared as always with the sound of his staff tapping stone. The man was a mountain of broad shoulders and sharp eyes, his presence enough to silence the chatter before he spoke. His gaze swept across the gathered disciples, lingering for the briefest moment on Liang before moving on without comment. That flicker of recognition, however small, struck Liang harder than any blow. "Listen well," Cai barked, his voice cracking through the mist like thunder. "Breath alone is a candle. A candle flickers and dies with the slightest wind. To wield fire, one must shape it. Today, you will learn the first form. Falling leaf." The announcement rippled through the disciples. Spines straightened, eyes widened, whispers hissed in the corners of mouths. Even Zhaoran's scowl faltered into something sharper, eagerness mingling with his usual pride. To learn a form was to step beyond mere survival drills. A form was the first true glimpse of the path of martial technique, the first brush with cultivation made visible. Cai raised his staff and moved through the sequence with deliberate precision. Each motion was fluid, his body bending and shifting as though caught in a rhythm older than stone. His arms swept wide like branches swaying in autumn winds. His feet rooted and shifted like the trunk of a tree bending yet unbroken. His body sank low, then rose, the entire sequence carrying the weight of both grace and hidden force. "Do not mimic blindly," Cai commanded, his tone cutting through the awe. "A leaf falls because the wind carries it. Your breath is the wind. Without qi, this is dance. With qi, it becomes force. If you cannot feel that truth, you will rot in the outer courts forever." The disciples spread across the platform, giving themselves space to move. Awkwardness followed like a shadow. Arms flailed too wide, feet stumbled over stone, shoulders stiffened instead of flowing. The spiral carvings on the platform glistened with dew, and more than one disciple nearly slipped in their eagerness to impress. Cai stalked between them, his staff striking the stone whenever he saw error, his corrections sharp as slaps. Liang moved carefully, his body protesting each shift. The bruises from punishment still ached, but he forced his breath to steady. He sank low, inhaled, and felt the faint ember in his dantian stir. When he swept his arm downward in imitation of a falling leaf, warmth flickered along his veins. It was barely there, subtle as the warmth of a candle on the skin, but it was real. Not just a gesture. Not just movement. It was more than empty form. Beside him, Zhaoran struck at the air with sharp violence. His movements were strong, his angles precise, but his breath came ragged. He forced each motion harder, faster, as if speed and strength alone could bend the form to his will. His followers watched from the edges with nervous admiration, but even they could see the cracks forming. The leaf did not fall with the wind. It was torn apart by storm. Cai's staff cracked against the stone near Zhao's foot, the sound splitting the murmurs. "Fool," Cai barked. "Strength without breath is wasted. Force without harmony is trash. Feel the wind. Do not tear at it." A ripple passed through the crowd. Some disciples glanced away quickly, hiding their smirks, but others let the rebuke settle like a stone in their hearts. Zhao's face darkened, humiliation burning across his features. His eyes flicked toward Liang, who had just completed the form without stumbling. Though Liang's movements were clumsy, his breaths guided him, and the faint warmth answered his motions. Hours stretched as CAI demanded repetition. Over and over the disciples sank, rose, swept their arms, rooted their feet. The sun climbed and burned away the morning frost. Muscles screamed, lungs burned, the stone grew hot beneath their feet, but CAI allowed no pause. Sweat poured down faces, staining robes dark. Liang endured, focusing on the ember at his core. With each cycle, the warmth steadied. By the third hour, he felt it flow faintly into his limbs, guiding the arc of his arms, strengthening his stance. When he swept his arms like branches shedding leaves, he swore the air stirred. Not enough to move dust, not enough for others to notice, but enough for him to feel. The leaf had begun to fall, carried not by muscle but by breath. Across the platform, Zhao Ren's movements grew harsher. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicked constantly toward CAI in search of approval that never came. Each strike was meant to dominate, but his breath faltered, his body stiffened, and frustration twisted every line of his form. At last, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, CAI raised his hand. The disciples froze mid-motion, gasping, dripping sweat onto the stone. Enough, CAI declared, his voice rumbling with finality. You are seeds in poor soil, but some may yet sprout. Remember. Breath is root. Form is trunk. Qi is leaf. Without harmony, all falls to rot. His staff struck once, the echo carrying into silence. Then he turned and departed, his robes trailing like storm clouds behind him. The disciples collapsed where they stood, groaning, massaging aching limbs. Zhao Ren lingered at the edge, his glare fixed on Liang. He stepped close enough for his words to cut low, sharp as a knife. You think yourself clever, Zhao hissed. Enjoy the elders' scraps while they last. When your flame sputters, I will grind the ashes beneath my heel. He stalked away, his followers trailing after him with uneasy glances. Liang exhaled slowly, letting the ember in his dantian calm. His body ached as if shattered, but inside, the warmth glowed brighter than ever. That night, his quarters were quiet save for the distant sound of wind moving through pines. Liang sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, moonlight spilling through the small window. He inhaled, guided breath into the ember, and let his body shift slowly into the stance CAI had shown. Arms swept wide, feet rooted. When he exhaled, the ember flared. Qi leapt faintly along his veins. The air stirred, barely more than a sigh, but it stirred. His heart raced as he moved through the sequence again. Falling leaf. Not perfect, not powerful, but alive. His first technique. A soft flutter drew his eyes to the window. The sparrow perched on the sill, feathers silvered by moonlight. Its black eyes gleamed with quiet judgment. You again, Liang whispered, lowering his arms only slightly. Do you mock me, or guide me? The bird tilted its head, feathers ruffling. Its gaze lingered on the spiral at his hand, which pulsed faintly in rhythm with his breath. The tingling beneath his skin made unease crawl through him. The mark had been quiet since the valley, but tonight it responded. The sparrow gave a single soft chirp, then spread its wings and vanished into the night. Liang lowered his arms at last, chest heaving with exhaustion. Yet triumph burned in his heart. For the first time, he felt less like an intruder among disciples and more like one of them. The path stretched long and perilous before him, but tonight he had taken a true step forward. Tomorrow the drills would resume. Zhao Ren's hatred would sharpen. The punishments would grow harsher. But tonight, Liang allowed himself one breath of pride. One breath of belief that he might endure the path ahead.